getting ready for the
Yep.
playoffs.
You see yourself, Tom, you should be good to go.
Well, we should be good to go at 7 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. Any additions to the agenda? If not, somebody wish to move the agenda as presented, Lyle? Any discussion on Lyle's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question.
Are you kidding?
No.
It didn't come up for you?
You're on here.
Well,
No, well,
Oh, it just says movement, oh, sorry. Yeah.
okay, it's carried unanimously. We'll move on to the next one on the agenda, which is the regular meeting of January the 10th. Any questions? There should be no errors or omissions, but anyway, okay, Judy moves it. Okay, any discussion on Judy's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of it? Still having problems getting in, I think.
Just restart it and see.
Wait for Judy.
it finally,
Okay, it's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you. Moving on to correspondence. We have two letters there, one from the Town of Tofield. Any questions on? Okay, second one is from the Crowsnest Pass.
There's two on Crowsnest Pass. It's a little confusing. One's to the physicians and then the other one's to the nursing. And one is in response to the City of Salt Lake letter that you saw at the last meeting, and the other one is independent and came from Crowsnest Pass themselves.
I think personally, we're gonna probably see lots of these in the near future. Alberta Health, our healthcare system is being taxed to its limits, and there are a lot of people that are just at the end of their rope, and so I think we're gonna see more and more of these happen, but both organizations, you know, both from the Crowsnest Pass, you know, and I appreciate they say that, you know, they don't know we're having a problem if we don't hear from us, but I sometimes question whether, how much ink and stamps and letters help. Is there any other thoughts or questions on either of those two, well, I guess there's three, one from Tofield, two from Crowsnest Pass? If not, somebody wish to, okay, I'll pick Richard, sorry, Barry. Okay, Richard moves this to file the correspondence. Any discussion on Richard's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Thank you, back up.
Yep.
It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to current business. We all know that we had a presentation from the Lions Club, and we had a discussion on how they can do it. Same as what we're doing with Kinsman Club, so there's a letter there from the president of the Lions Club requesting that same format that we're doing with the other groups. Go ahead.
And for council with that, really what it does is it allows the group to come with an idea, talk to Public Works and to the Community Services Manager, look at these, and they deal with stuff with you guys all the time. So they know how to put a presentation together fairly quickly, they know what information you're looking for when they bring it forward. And the club can go talk to them and say, hey, we want to put a bench here. You know what, that already fits in our criteria of what we're doing, here's what we can do, And then they put it in their report that they're working with the Lions Club to put a bench at a park. If it's something bigger, if they wanna put a bench with, I don't know, 3,000 trees behind it, Public Works and Community Services can say, hey, that's a great idea, that needs council approval, because that's going to implement, the planning for this park area. So there's been several things that the Lions Club has worked on as part of the pool project. The pool itself was the big project to get finished, but as that project developed, there was also talk of several different things that have come up. One being, they have an idea for the time capsule, picnic areas outside the fencing, tree planting. Obviously, we had the presentation for the art on the sidewalks, those sort of things. So, and it also gives the other side of that too. If it goes through Community Services and Public Works and they don't get the response they can always bring a project back to council. But it gives you, it opens up the dialogue and allows these small projects to go forward a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And we ran into it, and the reason why we implemented it is when the Kinsman Club first started doing some of their small community projects, they would come and they wanted to make a presentation to paint a bunch of posts. And then the next week, well, we want to make a presentation because we got that painting done, so now we want to replace the chain on there. And the council of the day went, hey, you don't need to come every time. So,
So this kind of brings it in line with what we're doing with the Kinsman Club and the Canets. And so I think as any other clubs come along, I think this will be something that we'll recommend to them too first, and then they, again, like Kim says, if it's a larger project, great, but if it's something minor.
Am I allowed to vote on this?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless the Lions Club's paying you to vote.
Less paid, yeah, you're getting paid to vote.
Let me make a phone call.
You missed that opportunity to put that on the your
It's a
agenda.
job that I'm taking.
No, it's not service groups, not a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest unless money is involved.
So do we have a motion on this then?
So what I did is I put together a motion that's very, very similar to what was done for the Kinsman, and it's that council supports the Vulcan Lion Club Community Work Project Initiative and directs administration to allow Public Works and Community Services to coordinate with the Lions Club to identify and approve individual projects, as well as determine when a specific project would require further council approval.
Yeah.
And that kind of covers everybody's butts. If Stu and Bonnie are having a discussion on whether this should go to council, if one of them thinks it should, it probably shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree.
if it's a no-brainer, it will just happen.
So anyway, that's the potentially a motion if that's agreeable to somebody, but,
I'll make that.
okay, Barbara moves this one. Okay, any discussion on Barbara's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. And it was carried unanimously. Okay, moving on to the industrial sub. So a couple meetings ago, there was a discussion about it, and this information has been brought back to us on how we could proceed.
So you've all had a chance to read the report. I also sent out the industrial land, we were gonna put the industrial land use strategy onto the agenda. Obviously, it's already been approved by council. So what I did is I went through, we have updated cost estimates, which we've discussed with council and you guys have seen. We took that $2.9 million that they put there and tried to answer your questions. I sent out, previous to the meeting, questions on the assessment and what possible development could look like. And again, so that we're not putting anything that's related to FOIP into the agenda, we sent that out individually, and it gave you an opportunity to look at every property out of the industrial subdivision, actually click on it and see what the assessment was for. So you could see if 3 of building A were built out there, here's approximately what the taxation would be that would come off that. So we did the development plan based on the conversation that council had in closed session, which now that it's in open, is for the development of Jameson Road, 2nd Street Northeast to a gravel base with infrastructure in, and then putting the water and sewer in the loop of the rest of the subdivision, which will include a little bit of subgrading to get it to where the road will be. So we put that together. SEMA Plus has provided the cost estimates. We included a map so that everybody would know what the projects dealt with. Again, this top loop will be just water and sewer. This bottom will be water sewer. Along the Jameson Road, we'll have curb. Along 2nd Street Northeast, we'll have ditching, and then a gravel road base suitable for industrial traffic.
Sorry, go ahead.
The next being the bottom drawings, and I know these are a lot harder to see, so you have to zoom in a lot further. These drawings were done in 2013, so there will be some changes. We're obviously not going to service all those lots with the gravel road, and these drawings showed in the road surface. They also showed pavement on these two roads, which we obviously changed to go to gravel so that we can accommodate servicing as we decide what it's going to be. There's no sense putting a 6-inch service into every lot if all they need is a 1-inch service there. And then the last, sorry, you have a question
No,
about the
keep
other
going,
side?
I'll ask
Richard?
you when we're done.
Okay, so then we get into the bottom, and this is just trying to answer that question about how much money do we have available, how would we fund something like this? So we took all of the available grant funding, so if you took, you can see what we had to December 31st, 2021. We have the anticipated funding for 2022. The MSI is pretty firm, like they've told us that's what this is going to be for this year. The federal gas tax, because the federal budget isn't complete. But if you average out the last 10 years, that's where we'll be at with that as well, with the program continuing. We have some money that's already been spoken for out of that grant fund, and you can see that there, and that was to finish up that paving on the First Street South project. So with that, the available funding from federal gas tax and MSI is 1.455. Something to keep in mind with that. We've done very few projects in the town where we actually used the current year's worth of MSI, but in this case, you would have to. The next is the reserve funding that we have. Council has a balance at 2022 of $184,000 in the street, $88,000, almost $89,000 in water, almost $89,000 in sewer, and then your contingency reserve contained $203. As you know, in the short time you've been council, you've been spending some money out of there. So the first was $14,000. Obviously, that was for the top coat of paving, and that was the town's portion that we didn't use grant funding on. And then the contingency reserve was lowered by $109,000. That was the motion to replace the water meters that we did a couple of weeks ago. So it leaves a total funding in reserves of $543,877.08 for a total amount of capital. This is basically cash that you guys have on hand to spend on a project is $1.999,618.55. Leads us into the next page, so that leaves us on $2.9 million. It leaves us about $1 million short. So what I did is went into Alberta Capital Finance, which has changed to municipal funding, loan funding through the province, and we've done the interest rates and the cost of borrowing for all those different years based on 700,000, 1 million, and 1.3. And the reason why I picked those three numbers is 1.3, if you borrow all of that, then you would leave some money in your reserves, those sort of things, which you guys have talked about, you know, the advantages and disadvantages of doing that, or not spending all the MSI, or because you can use that on different projects. I did the $1 million because that's kind of where we know, but that $1 million would be if that project went right to the total budget for everything to complete. That means using all of your contingency, that's everything. In looking at the cost estimates in that, Stu and I went through it, there's $300,000 in contingency involved in that. and some cost-saving areas that did. So we're anticipating, these are always engineered estimates. We have found for most of our projects have come in about 12% higher. So what we looked at is saying, if we did this project, put it out for tender, we're anticipating it would come in lower than that 2.9 by
Lower or higher?
lower than that.
Okay.
So with that information, we know that just in contingency alone, there's 300,000. So if we don't go into the contingency at all, brings you down into that 7 to 750 range for this project. So that's why the borrowing set it there, and so that you can see the difference from an administration standpoint. You can see the funds that are needed are about 900,000. That's with everything. In looking at the numbers, the most reasonable rate for borrowing in that is about that 20-year range. And on the 700,000, you're only at $227,000 in interest with a payment of $48,000 a year. If you go to $1 million, you're up to that $70,000 a year and almost $400,000 in interest. So you really kind of have to, and that's where looking at it, figuring out, and that's what you guys are talking about is, if you wanted to go ahead with the project, how are we gonna do this? Give me some direction with that. Based on that, I made a recommendation, but this by no means is, we want a motion on this tonight, unless you guys are comfortable with it. But I put 2 motions there for you to start that conversation. If you're not ready to make a motion, have your discussion, and you can receive this for information and ask for things to be brought back. But if you're happy with the information, as your discussion goes along and I can answer some of the questions, you can.
Two things, well, a few things actually. The old pump station, because all that goes to that pump
To
station.
that
goes in.
station.
What's the life expectancy of that? Because it's $500,000 to do that as well, right?
It is.
So-
And right now, it's fine. And Stu has identified that in his planning stuff that is going to come forward. And so that is one of the conversations with this. Depending on how this goes, of course, you don't need it until you actually get the buildings out there, and it's dependent on what buildings go out
Right.
there. If you have something that's running a lot of water off of it, it's gonna become a priority for sure.
That brings up some of my next questions is, on reason and reserves, like, I'm not real comfortable, because if something happens to that thing, that whole area now, we need to fix it. Is there, like, any chance of a grant, emergency grant from the government, or we just get MSI, that's it?
MSI and federal gas tax are your infrastructure
Okay.
grants. Yeah.
So,
You can apply for specific projects, which we did for this industrial subdivision in 2016, I believe it was. And we applied for $1.6 million to move this forward so that we could boost our economic development, and we got turned down.
yeah. The other thing that this one annoyed me actually, was their quality control 4%. And I say that because you're paying a lot of money for them to do a job. Engineering is $230, with quality control, it's now
Yes.
$324, $630. I would assume that if they're gonna be paid big dollars to do a job, that they would make sure it's done right.
Oh, yeah, yes. So, and that's the difference between the engineering and the quality control. So the engineering pays for all the drawings, all the background,
Right.
the stormwater management, the making sure the right pipe goes. And the quality control is when you put it out to tender, you actually hire another company to put that stuff in. We pay the engineers to be on site so that we don't have our staff trying to watch them all the time. So we have our engineers watch, and that's what that quality control is for.
Okay,
We still have our staff on site overseeing, making sure that our engineers are watching
well,
what they're supposed to
that's,
as
okay,
well.
so you just told me something there, like,
Yeah,
we're paying them to be honest, forthcoming, to make sure the job's done right, but then we have to watch them,
Yeah,
and make sure they're being honest.
and we just do that to make sure that everybody's on base, because, they are our consultants. When you enter into this, we sign a contract with them for that.
There are a lot of groups and municipalities especially that on some size of the projects, you have an engineering group that design it, but you also have an engineering group that represents us to make sure that the engineering that they did was correct and exactly what Kim is saying, audits to make sure that everything works and flows.
So we're hiring engineers, paying them to do the engineering,
Yeah,
and we hire engineers to check that the engineering is done right.
you betcha.
Correct.
On bigger project,
On
we're not doing it on something like this.
Yeah.
This is strictly a, and you'll, when they do their presentation, on the first, you'll see that was,
Okay.
we've worked with BSEI and SEMA Plus for 20+ years on our street and sewer infrastructure. So when we do our stormwater studies that you saw the BSEI
Yeah.
on the bottom, that's SEMA Plus before they changed their name.
Okay,
So we've got that relationship with them.
And sometimes too, like even on the stormwater study, they might turn portions of it out, or, you know, as an example, a lift station. These guys are more civil engineers, they might hire a structural engineer to build the building, you know, so they will oversee the structural engineers portion of the building. And what they're asking for, to a degree, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, Richard, but it's not abnormal at all.
okay, I just wanted, it just strike me as different.
Yeah,
So for just about all our projects moving forward, looking at it from from where we present to you guys, engineering is always going to be in that 10 to 14% range. It's
Okay.
basic, and how they split that up, whether it's quality control and you can see, I believe on this project, they did it at 13%.
Yeah,
When you look at their total
yeah,
engineering.
yeah.
And when you talk to them about why that's split up into engineering and quality control, and Tom's done it several times to several engineers in this room that I've watched, why are we paying? What are we paying you for? And when you ask that question, it always comes down to the same thing. They're taking on the liability for you.
There's the word I was looking for.
For you guys as
That's the
council.
word I want to hear.
You guys have paid them to make sure that this is done right. And if it's not, they're supposed to go to bat for you.
and again too, sometimes, you know, we have seen where the engineers have made an error, and then they've had to come back and correct that error, then it's at their expense, you know, so.
So a couple of years ago, on a street program that we did, we had 2 blocks of curb and gutter laid at the wrong elevation. And at the end of that project, when we settled that out, that was, the entire cost of refurbing that was done by our engineers and the construction firm, because we had hired them and gone through that process. It was really simple from an administration standpoint. I walked out on the street, took 2 pictures and said,
Yeah,
that isn't what it's supposed to be.
yeah,
We'll look at it. And it was a little painful, like we went back and forth for
Months.
6 months. But at the end of the day, they had to find out whose fault it was. Because of course, contractors blamed engineers blamed contractors, but at the end of the day, they both realized that it wasn't what we had paid for.
so Kim, you being the CEO, like, are you comfortable using our reserves as a whole, or do you think we should be keeping reserves back? Because in my mind, that old pit its days are numbered, and it's $500,000.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, reserves, the same as anything else, it's always nice to have them, but you have them for a reason.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that we have them
Yeah.
for. When we get into the planning stage, you will see that those reserves were put in place for replacement of water, sewer, storm, and streets. And, you know, some people will argue with you, is that building an a section of the industrial, or is that replacing infrastructure in our town that's 70 years old?
Yeah.
And that's why I said I want to give you as much information, because if you want to move forward with this, we also have to go through the engineering, tender, all that. So
Yeah.
if we want to get this project done, there's a little bit of a time crunch with it, because SEMA's told me that it could take up to 8 weeks to get tender ready.
Yeah.
So that we can put it out. On the other side of it, the reserves are there for that. I know during the planning session, you're gonna have a lot bigger conversations about what's the priority right now. The last council, it was, well, from an infrastructure standpoint, they put the second line on their planning documents were to continue doing the infrastructure, which included putting money to reserves, those sort of things. The other thing is in 2014, when I became the administrator, we didn't have any reserves. We had a contingency reserve and that was it, and it fluctuated between $100,000 and $150,000.
Yeah.
So the fact that you maintain now about 1.5 in reserves, you're only talking about allocating 500,000 of it, including your contingency.
Yeah.
We know that when you are doing your budget, if there's any surplus from 2021, you're gonna allocate that surplus, because you didn't do it as part of the budget, you're gonna allocate that into contingency reserve for next year. So you're gonna be contributing back to those reserves as well.
Okay.
So, yeah,
I just didn't want to get caught in
that is the tough question that you guys as council need to ask. How much do you wanna borrow? If you
Exactly.
wanna move forward with it, how much do you wanna borrow? How much of your reserves do you wanna spend? And how much of your grant funding do you wanna spend? Because the way it's set out here, I can easily take whatever your recommendations are and come up with a borrowing bylaw and give direction, and that's where I talked about what these motions were. The ones that I put in there were, if you wanted to move forward, you could give me direction to direct SEMA, because they work for you guys as council, to go ahead and start the tender document process. Doesn't mean you're going to tender, it means you need to get the tender documents ready so that we can put this out. You also would need to give me direction, because we can't afford to pay the whole project out front, you'd have to give me direction to prepare a borrowing bylaw. And a borrowing bylaw like this is different than the one that you did for our regular operations. This has a 20 to 25 year lifespan, so you will have to open it to the public, you will have to give it first reading. The next meeting, you have a public hearing where you open it up for the public to, and we have to advertise it in the paper, all those things. And then after the public hearing, then you can give second and third reading. With this, you know, I've heard mixed feedback from the entire community. One of the things that always comes back is, you know, there's a lot of people that ask, when is that industrial gonna get developed, you know, like, so you guys have already had those hard questions. One thing I do wanna point out just before, Cole, is if you give direction to SEMA to move forward to get this to tender ready, and you decide not to move forward with the tender, you have to pay the engineering costs, which could be upwards of $100,000.
Yeah.
So just keeping that in the back of your mind, and, you know, at the end of the day, we pay engineering costs, whether we include them in the project or we pay them outright to prepare a project. Like Tom says, the province wants us to have all these shovel-ready projects, but not every community can have $300,000 or $400,000 worth of engineering done just sitting on the shelf waiting to go. We've got the majority of the engineering done, but to get it to a tender thing, we have to do some surveying, we have to have all that ready. And potentially, if you decide you don't wanna move forward with this because borrowing's not looking good, or you don't wanna deplete the reserves, or for whatever reason, we would have to pay that engineering up to that point.
I was actually gonna ask if we pulled out what the cost would be, so that was answered, thank you.
Really on the engineering side,
Yeah.
that's the,
Judy, you have a comment?
So with the cost of everything going up, because it's tough to get the materials, do you think we're giving enough, like you said, 14%? Do you think that's enough, just the way everything is?
yeah, so on this, for the contingency and the pricing that you saw, they have the contingency at 15%. So that's on top of course, engineering, quality control, all that. They put it at 15% contingency on each section, also all 4 sections of
Okay.
this.
All
So
right.
that's where it equates to, in all 4 sections, pretty close to 300.
And again, they would have canvassed some of their contractors to say, if we did a project, what's the going rate for 6-inch lines or 8-inch lines, what's the going rate? And so they'll say, yeah, this is what we can kind of get it at. And that's partly why the sooner we get onto it, if we're interested in doing it, the easier it is, because then these guys, these contractors are all bidding against each other. You know, you saw the county did theirs, and that's how it happens. They kind of know what they can get for pipe, they know where, you know, they've secured some or, and so.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, for this, like how, okay, phrase it different. I think if we went in favor of this motion, at least it's a start in the right direction. And I mean, there's gonna be public meetings, so we can get input But as far as I know, I mean, I obviously haven't been on, it's my second term on council, I don't know a whole lot of history regarding this particular thing, but is this, as far as we've gotten, or as close as we've got to develop out there in, how long?
50 years.
How many years?
In the time that it's been out
50
there,
50?
Yeah, well,
40, it went in the early 80s, late 70s.
well, I mean, we've had the land for over 50 years, the town's owned it, so, but yeah. And just, I'll use a community to the south of us that had the land, they had no development. They chose to take some of their funds from their MSI money, put in a road, subdivide it. They have now 6 structures up on their property, or on the land. And so they're, you know, which they would never had if they wouldn't have developed.
Right.
And again, exactly what you're saying, Lyle, is that we've kind of kept on dragging our feet, and I think Judy and Barbara have both said if we would have done this 40 years ago,
Yes, you
you know, we might have been full. But on the other hand, at the time, we had other projects that council felt that they needed to move in. We've got people that are interested in purchasing some properties, and, you know, they realize that there will be potentially a change in costs. Can we allocate all this money back to all of those lots? Probably yes, but do we really want to? Probably not. And so those are the things that we'll have to discuss into a larger degree. And again, what Kim has said, we have 3 or 4 off-ramps where we can say, no, you know, project's on hold. But like Cole asked, there is gonna be a cost. We're gonna have to pay engineering. Administration's already put in time and effort, but that doesn't stop us. Like, and I'll use the pool as an example. We originally thought that we were gonna have to borrow X amount of dollars, and we were gonna borrow it over a longer period of time. When the final tally came in, we went less time and less money, because we were able to, you know, use some more of our reserves, or council chose to do. So again, at that time, as long as we say, well, we want to borrow $1 million as an example, and we want to put it over 20 years, and then we come back and say, oh, you know, we only want to borrow 700,000, and we'll put it over 15 years, you know, type thing. We can still do that, but we can't go farther. If we went 20 years and it goes to 25, we have to change our borrowing bylaw again. Cool, sorry.
What makes sense to me right now is, I'm very interested in going forward with this, but because of the cost, if we decide to change our minds, I mean, that's an option. I do not wanna go down that path of losing $100,000 in cost for nothing. What I kinda, in my mind, recommend is, like, we've got 2 or 3 days scheduled in 2 weeks to sit down and talk about the future of this community. Perhaps we should maybe wait to go forward or be too committed on anything till maybe we have these discussions. That gives us 2 weeks, right? We can canvass
We'll
the
have to
community.
do 3, because we'll
3.
have to bring it back to the council meeting to make
That's
that
right.
decision.
Yeah, so you would, so based on that, you could receive it for information this evening. You could discuss it on the 1st and 2nd, and the soonest it would be back to council would be the 14th of February.
Is that timeline gonna be reasonable, though, if,
Depending on how much time SEMA needs to move forward,
okay,
right? Because you've already tied up money in engineering to this project.
Sure.
To get them to this point.
Sure.
As we are. So there's gonna be some costs regardless. But yeah, no, talking to one of the engineers, he was being fairly conservative, saying, the 8 weeks to get it ready. Talking to his boss, we might be able to expedite some of that to get it quicker. Biggest thing with projects like this is getting the tender out before guys are working. If they're already working,
it's trouble.
they're not that serious about picking up the job, so the bids tend to be higher. If they're not working yet, they're planning their year, we can get better prices. So there's an advantage to being early in the year, but again, this is a big decision, so more thought.
See, I feel like we have discussed it. I feel like we have received all of the information. And thank you for that extra document on Friday, Kim. And if we were to move forward, I like the 700,000. I do, rather than $1 million. $1 million's a little daunting for me to go, yeah. But I fully actually support moving forward on this.
And that's why,
That's-
if you're
you
good,
know,
somebody will put a motion forward. One thing that I would like, before somebody puts a motion forward, is getting that feeling for the borrowing, obviously.
Yeah.
One of the things,
And also because interest rates are going to be going up probably next month.
Absolutely, and one of the things I would like to know, and so that I can let you know, it's more about the MSI and the reserve funding,
Yep.
because I will match the borrowing to whatever you guys, and then really it's how much can we afford every year as a payment? Because you can structure it, whether it's 15 years or, 15 years at $80,000 or 25 years at,
One thing we have to remember too, to borrow $1 million, we have to pay it back, so it means there's gonna be a tax increase here someplace. And we have to realize that too. We have to think about Joe Blow out there and, Betty Sue that's sitting in their house trying to make a living. We have to consider that 80 or $100 a year might be a lot for them because it's whatever, but I am in favor. One of my questions, hold back 15%?
on our projects, it depends on where we're at. We don't do much of a holdback other than on the engineering side. So when we pay bills on this,
Yeah.
we tender the project and then everything gets approved by us through our engineers. So they receive all the bills, they review them, they send us to us for final approval, we give approval, and then they pay it out.
So all the firms that are looking at, they're well-grounded firms, they're not, nothing else be fly
Well,
or nothing
not
like that.
necessarily, but
No, because we have to, because of TILMA's a trade agreement,
Okay,
we have to put it out to open tender. So
Okay.
anybody can pick up documents and submit.
a bit.
But having said that, you guys award the tender. So all the bids will come in, SEMA will do a summary,
Yep.
and then make recommendations based on that summary.
Okay.
And there's things that to consider inside that. Council does have room, but you have to make sure that the decision you make is for a good reason. So if you were to turn somebody down just because you didn't like them,
Okay.
they could turn around and sue you for not following the proper process. Having said that, we can do, as part of the process, some pre-qualification stuff. And one thing that's been considered in the pre-qualification, and it hasn't got a whole bunch of discussion around that, but pre-qualification, you can have preferred vendors in there.
Yeah.
So if you had a local company, we can do that. And through our purchasing bylaw policy that we have, we do have 5% grace for somebody local for. Now, that local falls into town, we don't have
Yeah.
big companies that would do this job for people.
And sometimes too, some of the ones that might be on the shadier side have a tendency not to be able to qualify because they don't follow all the total rules. Like there's, like the WCBs.
They don't have the WCB.
And all of those categories, and so you get a small independent that you potentially anticipate would not be able to fulfill the job in a timely manner, they fall out of it. And same with the timing too, so that, if it looks like, and now I can use an example, the water line that went from Champion to Carnegie, the company that got, from Vulcan to Champion, I should say, had some questionable things in it. So then the engineering went up because they had to be there on site every day. So there was a cost because the bid was so low. So you have to be careful of that too. But like Kim said, there is preferred vendors, and sometimes they, some companies understand that that's what it's going to be. So I mean, as an example, we might find that the one company that got the other large job in the community might be really quite eager to bid on this at a better price because they don't have that $10,000 mobilization.
Yeah.
So they say, we can maybe cut it because we're just gonna drive 2 blocks,
Yeah.
or 3 blocks to do a project. So Judy, you got comments on?
So if we go ahead and I am in favor of getting it started, because this has been going on, I mean, it was going on when I was, that's host. And I think something needs to be done, but we do not have to lock in the amount tonight, do we?
You have to give me a direction for borrowing bylaws, so basically, the discussion should be, are you comfortable using all of the grant funding?
So if we, just to clarify, if we went with, say, the $700,000,
Then
Or-
if you go with 700,000, you're actually saying that you're not gonna use any of the contingency. So there's a risk with that. So, and I guess that's what I'm gonna say here, just to help this conversation along.
Yeah.
Is you have 1.99 available.
Yeah.
You need 900,000.
So we're short.
Based on that,
With a contingency.
that includes the contingency. I will have a further, if you guys say you wanna go ahead with borrowing, and you wanna use all of the MSI, federal gas tax, and your reserves, then I will do the borrowing based on another conversation with our engineers about the contingency, and what can we safely put in there, and it will be in that 9 to the $800,000 to $900,000 range. So then what I will have to do is bring back the 900,000 or whatever, and I'll try to use a more exact number, because for the borrowing bylaw, you have to say, we're gonna pay here, here, and here, and how's, so I'm gonna have to have more accurate numbers than just saying $700,000.
Correct.
And then over those timeframes, and based on where we're at, the biggest thing for the borrowing is what would you like your payment to be? Right now, 50,000 is a nice payment, because you can see 20 years on 7, and that's the one you were looking at, Barbara, that I think you're most comfortable with, is the 20 years, and it's because it's only $200,000 in interest and payment. The payment is what impacts the taxpayer the most, is what that payment is. The interest is what it is. You're gonna pay more interest if you do it over 15 years, you're gonna pay more if you do it over 25. So if you're happy with a payment in that $50,000 to $60,000 range, then I will tailor a borrowing bylaw to that based on the provincial rates that are there. So, you know, if you want the payment to be $50,000, then that really locks us into 20 years, 25 and 30 on 700, and 30 years on $1 million.
So if we borrowed $1 million and we use 900, we pay interest on 900, obviously,
No,
right?
and so one of the things with doing this is you do the borrowing bylaw, and then when we actually borrow the funds,
Yeah,
if it's less, then we pay on just what the less is.
that's what I'm saying.
So, for example, when we did the pool, the way the funding lined up, and because we didn't have any of the funding guaranteed, we had to do a borrowing bylaw for the $2.5 million, and that's what went in the paper, that was what was advertised, that's what we went through the process. At the end of the day, when we finished paying all the bills for the pool, we only had to borrow $1.6 million.
Okay.
So we borrowed $1.6 million based on the $2.5 million borrowing bylaw. So in this case, if you did a borrowing bylaw for the full 900, based on 30 years to keep whatever your payment it is, if you decided, and we got the project finished and the cost came in at 800,000, and it makes more sense to pay for it over 15 years,
Yeah,
you could do that, because that's a separate contract with the borrowing bylaw is your bylaw, and it's your contract with your taxpayers that this is how we're gonna pay for it. When you actually take the money from the province and we only need this much, we do a different contract with them. We'll sign that agreement that says we're gonna pay this back over the next X
So-
amount of years.
can I just say, I'm not real comfortable using our reserves. Having that reserve is a good business practice. That's a good practice to be in. We have old infrastructure, we have lots of things that's gonna go over the next 10 years guaranteed. We should keep some money back, I think, to pay for
We
that.
do have some more, right?
Yeah,
And
we
I
have
think-
300, right?
No.
No.
So this is just the reserves that are available through streets, water, and sewer.
Okay,
You have $1.5 million in reserves,
okay.
allocated to different things
Okay.
throughout. So this is basically through contingency, sewer, water, and streets.
Yeah,
And one thing to keep in mind with these reserves is the streets, water, and sewer constantly have money going back into them from the projects that we've already finished with the local improvement tax. So every time, if you own a property that has a local improvement tax on it, which I don't think anybody in the room does, but if you own a property with a local improvement tax, that money goes, when somebody pays that, goes directly back into these reserves. And when you guys did your interim budget, you can see that you, in the 2022 budget, you have allocated almost $100,000 into those three reserves from the 2022 budget. So out of that 500,000 in reserves, 100 of it is coming from this year's budget.
Okay.
So, and you've already allocated that. You know, of course, we do that in April when you finalize
Okay,
the budget.
that makes me more comfortable.
Yeah.
I get what Barbara's saying, you know, at that price range. I'm thinking for a borrowing bylaw, I think I would be more in favor of estimating a little bit more on the higher side, like if we did it for $1 million, you know, for right now, $1 million over 30 years, and that would be kind of worst case scenario.
Yeah,
And
and
then
you
if
don't
we
even
put it
need to,
smaller.
based on the dollars here, you don't even need to go to $1 million. To get this to tender and everything, based on the estimates that they've given us, which we traditionally have been 12% high, we only need 900,000. So really a borrowing bylaw, we could comfortably do it 900,000. We're administratively, we've looked at that and saying, we think that we're gonna be lower than that, and that's why we threw in that $700,000 number, because we think that's gonna be a lot closer to where we're gonna be at.
But to Lionel's point, 700,000 likely will be enough, will it?
Probably not.
It probably won't, and that's why the borrowing bylaw at 900, that includes all the
Sure.
contingency and everything. That's what you need to meet this cost estimate. And Tom, you've seen as many of these as I have. Have we ever been over a cost estimate that the engineers have provided?
Not at this level. We've had lots of other ones, and you know, again, to pick on the pool, when we were going through design, you know, their cost estimates were high because we hadn't tightened it up. This one here is quite tight, you know, of the design and construction, and so now we won't know until it goes out for tender, period, so, Barb, sorry.
I would like to see that, like I was saying before, as long as we can try and keep the payment down, so then, you know, it's not such a huge blow to the taxpayers every year.
Right.
You know, and going up, so that will be part of you getting the.
Bringing it back.
And then for us to look at it once it comes back and see where we, you know, if we're gonna do it 30 years or 25, and then ultimately it will depend upon the final cost, so, and only
And again, you know,
500 from the.
In historically, you know, I mean, if you take a look at most municipalities in the last 40, 50 years especially, the majority of us do not have enough money saved to do the projects. I mean, there are some municipalities that are fortunate that have money in the bank account, but most of us don't. And if we would have waited for that, we would still be on gravel roads and wooden sidewalks in this community. You know, I mean, if we would have waited for the money to be in the bank, we could never have done it. Now, you know, again, we've had previous mayors that have had different philosophies, but we did have one mayor that believed that every project should be borrowed, every cent of it. And the reason why is because, you know, today's people are paying for it, not yesterday's. So, go ahead.
So one of the things on the borrowing side, just so that you guys are comfortable with, that's why I'm trying to focus it more on what do you feel is an acceptable payment? Because that's, you know, what can the taxpayers handle is it, and I'll use the pool as the best example. When we budgeted for the pool and for doing the original borrowing bylaw at 2.5 million, council had figured out payment on that was gonna be $130,000 a year. So when the project came in significantly cheaper, rather than lowering that payment and just doing the loan for, you know, the 1.6 and just lowering that, we're like, the conversation of council of the day was, we've already budgeted for this $130,000, so we can lower it significantly. So they took that, but they still wanted that borrowing, again, so that the people 15 years from now who are in our community are still paying for a portion of pool. So they kept that payment at that 130,000, which cut our borrowing down 15 years on $1.6 million. This is where I want, what are you comfortable with, what you guys have seen through the documents, what kind of tax dollars are potentially available out there. It's, some are high, but the majority of them are at if you average them out, you saw where they are. How many developments are we gonna have out there? What kind of money are you gonna bring in? What are you comfortable with a loan payment for the next potentially 20 years? And if I'm hearing, most are leaning in that $50,000 range. So if it's 900,000, I'm gonna tell you, we're gonna be looking at probably 25 years on the 900,000.
I'm kind of the opposite,
I was gonna say as well,
go ahead.
I thinking, it is the initial cost, like per year, yeah, would be lower with a longer mortgage, I guess, or borrow. But I still think the quicker this is paid off, the more money we save in the end, and more ability perhaps we have to move on to another project. And I mean, that won't be this council, but we don't wanna hamstring, potentially we don't wanna hamstring 30 years of debt when we could have it paid off in half the time.
But you also have to realize that if you do go with a higher payment, the tax rates are gonna go quite high.
Yeah.
And then when do you pull them back down? You can't really.
Probably never.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, we've held taxes at a flat rate. And the problem is that we've had previous councils and, you look into other municipalities that, have very little taxation to their residents. And, to be honest with you, the majority of those residents don't know it. They see it when their tax bill comes out, but they anticipate that there's gonna be an increase. I mean, most of them anticipate that their money that they've got in reserves or in securities or in investments are gonna gain them something. Most people do not put them in at 0%. So sooner or later, most municipalities have to realize that their things do have to go up. So you can't keep it at 0 forever, but anyway, Trudy.
I think we also have to remember if these businesses are coming in, not only are they paying taxation on the industrial area, hopefully they're building houses and bringing kids and they're going to the school. So we can't forget that portion of it either. Look how much, I remember when they started that Whispering Drive, I thought, who the hell is gonna live back there? Because I drive back there and it was just barren. And where did I move? I built
Yeah.
Like, look how it's grown. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable how far it's come already. And I think if you build it, they will come and hopefully they'll bring their families with them.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing you have to look at. And again, we as this municipality have sat on that property for all these years, anticipating that we're gonna find a developer or we're going to find people that are gonna buy the lot and then run the water and sewer at their expense, and it hasn't happened. So we have to go to a plan B or plan C or plan D, whatever you wanna put on it. And if that's what this council's interested in doing, I think we can start the process and, get that engineered. And Cole, you had a comment about it, that if it comes in tendered higher than we have to opt out, we've lost that money. We don't, we've got more engineering done than what has to be done, so all we have to do is just dust it off and bring it back out again, so. Anyway, go ahead.
I guess, I'm looking at the $1 million and the 20 years, it's just under $21,000 in annual payments to go get the $1 million versus the 700. Am I looking right there? At 20 years, it's...
Yeah, you're just about 50,000 for 20 years on annual payment, and then you're at 70.
Yeah, he was looking at the
Yeah,
interest,
so
27.
so you're just, that 21 to 22 range, I should say, but what would that tax be on a house?
Right, and because of the assessment on every house being so much different, that's an impossible question to answer. What I can tell you is we have $200 million worth of assessment in our community. And so in order for us to raise $100,000, So if you went with $100,000 payment on that chart, you'd have to raise our mill rate by 1. So a half a mil is 100,000, based on the two. So if you own, based on that 200 million, we're at our tax rate right now. If you own a $100,000 house and our tax rate is at 15, which is what our industrial is,
Yeah.
it's 15. If your business is worth $100,000 land and everything, it's $1,500 worth of tax. If it's $1 million, it's 15,000.
Yeah.
So
So,
easiest, quickest math you can do. It's, yeah, every place is valued differently, so.
well, would this go up a quarter?
Based on the $50,000, yeah, you'd be a quarter mil.
Yeah.
Raise in the tax rate. Again, like what we talked about when we were doing the budget, we're also waiting on our assessment and our financials so that we can give you a budget. We're also anticipating an increase in our assessment based on the work that Lyle does. Because properties are selling and we've seen a pretty good market the last couple of
Yeah.
years, so we should see that. And that's how council's been able to not increase taxes, is because when the assessment goes up, you have more money coming in, you don't have to raise tax. But like Tom says, that can be dangerous too, because when your assessment falls, then you have to raise taxes just to get the same amount of money again. So sometimes it's proactive to have that money earmarked for things like reserves, those sort of things.
So I guess, for tonight, if we've got 2 or 3 different alternatives. One is to do nothing and wait for a couple, 3 weeks, or is that we could start the process and get some of it going, anticipating that if for some reason, or not anticipating, but if for some reason something comes about, we have that off-ramp. There's an expense to that off-ramp, but we can get out of it. We don't have to follow through. We still have to do the advertising on the borrowing bylaw and still bring it back to council for the first reading and then start on that process. And that takes a month or so.
Well, after listening to everybody, I'm comfortable with moving forward tonight. I guess the question is what, you need to know what amount we're borrowing.
I've kind of got a pretty good feeling about where you're at with reserves and that sort of thing. So what I'll do is I'll just based on conversation with SEMA and our calculations of the budget that we have, I'll have to bring back borrowing on very close to $9 million, or sorry, 900,000, based on the information that we have, and that will be the safe side. I do, if I may, I want to do kind of a plug for the newspaper, because Cole, you had asked in a previous discussion about this, how do we get the public involved in this? How do we get that engagement going? This is the plug for the paper. They're watching the meeting. That's the first thing he's going to ask me when he calls tomorrow. If council's moving forward with this, what does it look like? And so I'll go through that process with them about getting the stuff to the engineering, bringing the borrowing bylaw back, and then once that hits the paper, that's when you guys are going to start hearing from people, good, bad, or indifferent. And then when you're talking to them, show up at the meeting for the public hearing if there's a bunch of kickback from it, and that still gets you to that point where if you're not going to move forward, you can opt out, stop your engineering, that sort of thing, or everybody tells you this is a great idea, exactly what you guys are thinking, and you march forward. And if you stop, you only lose the cost of the engineering, but you don't lose it because that engineering is still ours. When you told me to move forward with this, I went up to my binder, pulled it off, and dusted it off and said, SEMA, you provided me prices 10 years ago, bring them up to today's price. And that's what they did, based on all the information we had. So you're not losing that information.
Okay, Barbara, do you have a comment or question?
I personally, once the discussion is finished, I would like to try to move forward and take the recommendation that you presented and move forward.
So you're making a motion to,
You could make that as one motion, or
Okay.
you could do it as two different motions, depending on how you would like to do it. Really, if you want to move forward, you're directing, I can read them if you would like.
Sure.
That council directs SEMA Plus to prepare tender documents for the infrastructure servicing of the Vulcan industrial subdivision, and that council directs administration to prepare a borrowing bylaw in order to fund a portion of the proposed 2022 industrial subdivision servicing plan.
Is that agreeable?
That is agreeable.
Okay, so
What I would like to
Barbara's
see.
made this motion. Any more discussion on this motion?
I just wanna say, I'm glad Cole brought that up, because I was thinking the same thing, where are we gonna be, like, if we're out, in the end, we're not gonna be out any money, like you say, it's gonna be
Yeah,
engineering.
you're gonna spend it, but it's gonna have value. Sure.
Good discussion. Enjoyed it.
Okay, so any other discussion on Barbara's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. And it is carried unanimously. Good, thank you. Okay, moving on to the Health and Wellness Foundation Vulcan Moon 5K Walk and Run.
You've all had a chance to see the report. They want to do the run in March. It's kind of an unusual request for us. March is, well, specifically this time of year is about when our weather breaks. So we could either have a foot of snow, or we could have water running everywhere, or it could be dry as a bone. So it was a pretty tough request. It's not the usual traditional route, because they're anticipating that there may be some snow and ice. So in order to stay safe, they'd like to come around on the full 5K, come in and then come down 3rd Avenue, and then down Memorial, and meet back up with the park.
Did they say why they chose the middle of March as opposed to later?
They didn't. It was, yeah, just what they requested. So, so we went through it. Bonnie's had a chance, you can see in the report, talked to Stu about it. One of the things they asked for in their formal letter of request was walking pathways clear of snow and ice. Being that it's the 18th of March, it could snow that afternoon. So what Stu wanted to talk to council about is, we'll do our regular maintenance, but again, one of the things to consider is they're also going down that 3rd Avenue there as well. Those are public sidewalks, or those are privately owned sidewalks. So, it could. The other thing about that is there are some areas there that do not have sidewalks. So there's a chunk here, so we are gonna anticipate them being in the road. So with that, we also have the request for the CPO to be on during the event, and she's gone through it, said that she could help with traffic control on Center Street when we cross Center Street now. Depending on what the weather's like, could significantly impact the amount of people that are participating in this event as well. We hope that it'll go well and they have 100, but even 100 in an event like that, crossing Main Street and a few of these streets, with their
Staggered start anyway.
with their staggered start, and with their we've had several other events like this in our community. Some of them, to be completely honest, and Tom knows this, and Lyle, we've had some that have done 5Ks and not even contacted the town. They just use the walking path, but it still has the same impact if you've got 100 people crossing Center Street. So the fact that they came to they're not looking for permission to close any roads, just some assistance with the public works for the pathway itself, to make sure that there's regular maintenance done on it, but it's as clear as it can be. Lyle walks on it every day. They're out there every day when they can. The other being the barricades, which is a very simple request. We do for the new councillors that, remember when we reviewed the rental rates in the rates and fees bylaw? This is an example of that, where you're gonna give them the barricades for the day. It does have a monetary value that you could put to it, to say, okay, this is how the town supports this group, as we provided this in, and this is what it would cost to somebody that we rented it to. So there's that, and then, again, approving the CPO. And we cover her wages. We don't do overtime because she's a salaried position, so this is time off in lieu or that, so, or rescheduling so that she's there.
I would make a motion for because in lieu of COVID, you know, everybody's locked down. This is a good step forward, I think. It's a good step out in the right direction. Just that alone, I'm in favor of. So I'm gonna make a motion that we go with what they're asking and,
So I have a recommendation, would you like me to read it out loud?
sure.
The council supports the Vulcan County Health and Wellness Foundation Vulcan Moon 5K Walk and Run event scheduled for March 18th, 2022, and directs administration to provide assistance for this event through Public Works, providing regular levels of maintenance of snow removal along the route, and the supply of barricades, as well as the attendance of the community peace officer to assist with traffic control.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Any discussion on Richard's motion? Hearing none, we'll call a question. And it is carried unanimously.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Sure.
Just as, just my thoughts on it, because yes, I walk every day, so I think Margaret does too. I think it'd be kind of a good PR community support thing too, if council would go out and, yeah, just participate, those of us who can, but just get out there again, maybe interact.
Yeah, and support them.
That's great. I probably won't be there because I'll probably need my wheelchair, but I appreciate
I
that.
got a wagon.
So you got a bike that you got a bike that you could lap everybody with.
Yeah. But no, you're right, Lyle. I think if we can participate in it, it's really
Yeah.
show great support to the Health Foundation, and like Richard said too, with COVID, it's kind of nice for maybe to get out and hopefully it'll be a beautiful day and
Yeah.
everything will go good, so.
Good Lord, Lord.
Okay, anything else on that? If not, we'll move on to the committee reports. There is one there from the Waste Committee of December the 1st. Any questions on solid waste? If not, we'll move on to the SAWA's Executive Committee meeting of December the 7th. Okay, no questions on that one. Then there's the Vulcan Regional Response to Elder Abuse, December the 7th. Any questions on that one? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to ORSCs of the October 14th. Okay, no questions on any of those four. If none, we will ask for a motion to.
I'll make that motion to approve as presented.
Okay, Lyle moves these. Any question on Lyle's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. And it is carried unanimously. Okay, moving on to verbals, Councillor Reports. Councillor Magnuson.
I did not have any meetings during this stretch, but just talking to people around town. It's a sad day the other day when the lights, Christmas lights came on Saturday. We sure received lots of positive comments on that. I mean, I think it looks fantastic.
It does.
Yeah, the days are getting longer, but yeah, they look great.
They don't go down until after Ukrainian New Year because a former councillor walks to it will phone us and let us know when that is.
That makes sense.
Okay, any questions for Lyle? Hearing none, we'll move on to Councillor DeBolt.
I really didn't have any meetings, just talking to the Lions about the, for lifeguard funding of that, that's kind of just inside the Lions, but that's about it. Just stuff we're just talking stuff about the pool and of course the report on the passing the bylaw for letting them, you know, go to the small stuff and that, so that type of stuff, but more Lion stuff than councillor stuff, but 2 cents in.
Not a problem. Any questions for Richard? Hearing none, we'll move on to Councillor Sanderson.
On January 13th, I had a special meeting with Marcus Foundation with the contractor Derek Weiss, and we went up, which is getting ready for, we're getting the first part ready of the seed funding to see if this is viable or not, which is an application for background and purpose. And we got the information taken from the Collier's report as well as Pine Valley Lodge in Hinton. And as it is similar to a potential facility that we would look at here in Vulcan. Questions were asked about land and facility infrastructure, and I advised that if they're requesting, that the council's requesting a delegation before talks concerning monetary questions. There's a sensitivity analysis, and it should be ready for our next meeting here on January 25th. And then at that time, the board will either move forward, and then that's when the housing committee will come in, and there'll be a meeting then with the housing committee after that. So that's hopefully something that we'll see here in the near future. January 13th, I have an Fcss meeting. Mike Molnar has kindly stepped up to take the village, he's not a councillor, but he will sit on the board for Fcss, so that was nice to hear. It was decided to set up 2 different committees. There's going to be a budget committee for more hours for the director. They're finding that with the change of staffing and the cleanup still being made from the previous director, that it's taking more time. So they're going to look at a budget for that and request performance reviews. The staff and the director would like performance reviews, so they'll be setting that up as well. And every 3 months, I believe there's the food bank meeting, which is part of that. So it was noted that hampers for this past year have gone up 25%, and that the people have doubled. More families are living together to help make ends meet. 87 more adults and 103 more children have used the food bank. A new input form has been created. It tracks baskets going out. You can have 10 hampers per year. Doesn't mean you can't go in and get food, but there's the hampers that they give out. This should also identify the needs of families as financial information is required now, and hopefully catches those that are going to numerous towns, I guess, to get hampers. So we'll hopefully put it. Isn't that sad?
It is, it's terrible.
And on January 17th, I had a victim services meeting, casino reporting time again. Everyone's info has been received. Casino is scheduled for later in the year, if you remember the month.
Yeah, it's the 3rd quarter, so July, August.
And so we have, Barbara has, we said that we will take some early if it becomes available. So Jasmine also has required a performance review, and all directors, as well as the RCMP and advocates, will be a part of that. Jasmine is hoping K Division will hopefully open up call-outs again, and board was asked if we would make it a policy to have all advocates and the program manager to have their first aid. So hopefully we'll be going ahead with that, so that was approved. January 20th, I had a golf meeting. The new director of golf, Scott, and his wife Christine came from New Brunswick, and he seems really on top of the game. He has run a facility before, which runs the whole thing, including the kitchen, so hopefully that will relieve that headache. He's all about spreadsheets and making sure that what, you know, the people that are working, they'll be working both sides, not just kitchen, or, so hopefully it will run smoother. Operating budget and 5-year capital budget should both be finalized at the February meeting. Trees, you might see they're trimming and taking some trees down the golf course as of today for sure. So we're excited going into this new year with the new director of golf and the format that they have set up. And to answer Barbara's question about the whole floor sewer septic tank, Duke was out there to put a smelling thing, and I said, well, I think it was a warmer day, so he will go out and check again on a warmer day and see if, what he can do about that.
Because it's really quite pungent.
And
I
that's
don't wanna do my job.
Okay. Any questions for Judy? Hearing none, thank you. Councillor Coffey.
January 18th, I had Vulcan Regional response to Elder Abuse Council. We're still awaiting to find out about a couple of grants, and then in the meantime, she's applied for yet another grant to make it sustainable. And then January 19th, I had a library board meeting, and I do know that they're coming to the town to see if they can get their grants a little bit early this year in February. And then just prior to the library board meeting, I did attend the Alberta Municipalities meeting about the Alberta Provincial Police Services apps transition. I don't know if you guys, anybody else was there. There were so many councillors and mayors and
Where was that?
it was online
Oh,
on Zoom. The Alberta municipality sent out an email.
That was on the
and-
Wednesday night that,
Yeah,
the,
at 6.
it wasn't Zoom, it was, yeah, WebEx. Anyway,
Yeah, I think you were at a meeting. I
yeah,
think I saw your van.
solid waste.
Yeah. Anyways, it was quite interesting. I would highly recommend that you guys, they had attached this document. I would highly recommend that you go through it. They did have, Paul Whitaker, who used to be, I believe at UCP NLA, he did speak. He kind of pulled apart their whole thing. They said that there's going to be an increase of members, like approximately 3,200, but they're not sure on so many details on if they're going to be, how they're going to tier them, if they're going to actually be able to carry handguns even. A lot of the capital costs, there's tons of inaccuracies. How, you know, with the cutting of the RCMP funding federally, how we're going to still fund the RCMP that will still be here, how are we gonna house these members of this new thing? So do we have to build a new building for them? You know, that kind of thing as well. They're looking at just a transition period of 3 years. It will cost probably over $1 billion to the taxpayers. They're saying that it's going to be a 50% increase minimum from for taxpayers for this, and they don't know how they would work. I asked, like, how would they work with victim services, and they're like, that's neither here nor there at this point. I know it's got to go to a referendum, but, here I have it. There's going to be trained 1,613, but they don't know how trained, if they would be even a sheriff position. And then 1,540 that will be like a level 2. And they don't know how they're going to distribute them, if it's going to be through population or if it would be land mass or anything like that. So I'm glad that Judy and I are going down on Wednesday. to the one in Lethbridge together. So that's all I have to say. So,
Did they say anything about, my worry with going provincial is we'll be like AHS and they can just pull our policing out to a red zone. And then we're left here with no
But
police.
the event that Barbara participated in isn't the one that's the Alberta municipality side, so.
Oh, that's, okay,
The
gotcha.
one that you guys are going to go to
That's
is the one I went to today in Okotoks, so.
And how was that?
I'll
I
talk
guess
about
you're
it.
gonna, sorry.
It's got a whole report on it.
yeah, and I'm just kind of like, I'm going to say that everything I've read so far, I'm a little concerned about. So, because we will have to keep the RCMP as well for other crimes. So,
Okay, anything else, Mark?
no, I just have a meeting with Health and Wellness coming up January 26th.
Okay, any questions for Barbara? Hearing none, thank you, we'll move on to Cole.
I didn't have any official meetings in this time period, but I've been quite busy with the committee I'm on within the South Grove. We're in the process of hiring project managers for a potential project that should be announced within the next few weeks. Also been starting my course for the Land and Property Rights Tribunal, which will go 4 days for me this week. And that's pretty much how it's been the last 2 weeks.
Any questions, Paul? Okay, thank you. I have, the SAWA executive, the majority of the stuff we've been talking about is grants. And if we don't qualify for, we've applied for 2 grants, one for $147,000 from the ACP, I think it is. And yet, I have it backwards. That one is, ACP is 200,000 and jobs and initiatives is $147,000. And we're not sure, it's like something like the swimming pool one, they keep on leading you down the garden path, and then if you start anything, then they kick you out, so. So we have a SAWA directors meeting on Friday, and so we've come up with a Plan A, Plan B, Plan C of funding. I also threw a Plan B in there too, but it got squashed pretty quickly, of how we might, move the project forward. So hopefully on Friday we'll be able to see some movement in it. The next one was the solid waste, and probably the biggest highlight on solid waste is that we did sign a 1-year contract to have our waste taken to a landfill, and it only went up $1 a ton. Trucking did go up, but the amount of waste that's coming in right now is down substantially from what it was a year ago, so.
Good.
So we're not sure if everybody's got all their projects cleaned up with COVID or what it is, but anyway, they did burn the burn pit. I probably should, Dick lets me know when they're burning, I should probably send it out to councillor, so if somebody gives you a question as why, there's a smell, or they try and burn it when the wind's blowing the direction that's not towards town, but it's pretty hard.
If you pass that on to me, I can get it.
Yeah,
Everybody fairly
it's just
quick.
so that if somebody phones up and says, geez, we're feeling the smell of the burn pit or whatever, what's going on, and if we had to haul all that waste, our amount would double.
Yeah.
So we're able to at least burn. Okay, and I went to the police meeting today. This one here was put on by the province of Alberta under this group that's going around and doing these town halls. And they also have, if you can't make it to one of the town halls, they also have some ones done virtuals. It was good. Some of the answers are definitely, that are canned. Some of the answers, that they don't really know. They're trying to come across like they haven't made a decision yet. They're trying to glean all this information from all of us and take it back. It was very disappointing. It was an Okotoks register, which is all that the facility could handle, and only 14 showed up, representing 7 municipalities. And it had to be an elected official or a CEO or somebody like a CPO or, you know, like, I mean, somebody in
Protective services.
somebody in that. But there was only, there was 14 representing 7. There was 4 staff members. When there was a question asked from the floor, they went through some slide presentations and then they came to a question and answer period. And some of them, he said, well, I'll answer that question when we come to it, but, you know, anyway. There was 4 staff members there and they were taking information down, but they weren't taking your name. Like, they didn't say, okay, Barbara asked question A or B or C. They said, you know, we don't want to know who you are. We just take your questions. They said on the infrastructure side, the province owns 70% of all the federally owned RCMP facilities. So they would have to, the federal government only owns 30% of it, so they'd have to come up with the 30% if they wanted to buy it, or else they could just say, RCMP, you can keep it. Leases, they figured that there will be some leases that will fall over. The transition, there's 46 municipalities that have their own policing force, or they're policing, but they're using the RCMP. They're not sure out of those 46 how many will transition totally over to this new provincial one, or whether they'll do a hire, you know, Joe's policing service that would qualify for whichever. So, you know, they're saying that, you know, that would have to be something that would be negotiated in. Coaldale is the only place in the province of Alberta that pays 100% of their policing. Right at the moment, Tabor, as an example, they get 70%. They pay 70%, the province pays 30%, or the federal pay 30%. Now, they did show some numbers, and their numbers that they're using, and this is what he used as the Price Waterhouse numbers. And he said some of those numbers could be skewed a little bit, but those are the information that they received from the RCMP or whichever, of how many staff members they have, and on and on and on, and how they were going to break that up. Exactly what you're saying with the level 1s and the level 2s, or A's and B's, and, you know. So there were some pretty decent questions. I think that everybody should get an opportunity. There was some really good questions, some really good discussions. Jason was there from the RMA or Vulcan County, you know, either one or both. And Tanya was there from AM, and also she sits as a chairperson of that policing policy group. And from Okotoks. So I anticipated there would have been more from some of the municipalities around there, but anyway, it was good. Some of it was kind of disappointing. You know, the 2 of the presenters, or 2 of the ones that were talking, both of them have worked in that. One was in the armed forces, and so he's got the armed forces side of the knowledge of what went on. The other guy, he was belonged in it. I was going to say it's ASAC, but I don't. That's not the proper. It's Alberta. It's where the RCMP, the municipal policing, have all got together and formed this group, and if there's a situation, a drug problem or whatever, they'll send some people out and
Asset.
No, it's not asset, but it starts with an A. But anyway, I should have written it down on this paper, but I didn't. But he was really interesting to talk to. I talked to him probably for half an hour after the event. There was a discussion about governance, and so there was some discussion on the governance, and I poked up my remarks and said, if you guys want to know about a governance model that doesn't work, just look at AHS for EMS. And everybody in the room, of course, claps. This guy says, well, you know, we don't want to get into political unless you can talk about politics all you want. That's a bureaucratically destroyed project. Mm-hmm. And I said, that was all bureaucrats. Had nothing to do with politics at all. And so him and I, he says, well, I might disagree with you. And I said, oh, you can disagree all you want, you know, type of thing. But anyway, there was a bit of bantering between him and I, this Doug and me over it. But anyway, it was well worth the time and effort to go to Okotoks.
Did they, talk about, how the 7 members that would form this provincial kind of commission to oversee it, how that would
No,
take place, or if it's actually even legal, because to have a politician running.
no, they never went, they showed, and they said, this is where we want us, again, what we want to make it look like, is those, I think are his exact terms, that it doesn't, it's not already been perceived of what we're going to build. We want to have your opinion on what you would like, you know, whether you would like a commission. And he showed us 2 or 3 different slides that showed of, you know, how the RCMP structure is, how the one potentially could be there, and how a second one. So he uses, as an example, BC, a couple of examples from BC, what they've done, and he doesn't think that they're the best or whichever. Saskatchewan's got another process. Nova Scotia is another one that's looking at a different one with a commission. And so anyway, but it was well worth the time, you know, like the half a day of time to invest. And again, if you can't go to one, if you can zoom in on one, Karen sent out that list of when you can go. Personally, I think that they were well worth it. I mean, again, I'm not knocking the the AMs, you know, area or the RMAs. They're wanting to make sure that all the questions are asked, but it just doesn't look good that this was the first one in the province of Alberta and in the south, and only 14 people showed up of 35. Because you had to have a ticket to get in, and that was just so that they could keep the numbers to the right amount for the so then he says it's weird. And he waited about 5 minutes and said we gotta get started. So. And it was the full, it started right at 8:30, well 8:35, and went right to 11 o'clock, and like I said, I stopped and visited with this guy from, I wish I could think of his title, but he was with the City of Edmonton Policing Force Service. And so anyway, yeah, it was good. I mean, I worry like Barbara and some of the rest of the room, you know, are we creating another, you know, EMS situation? And then they also had a time frame and a transition. And he says, unfortunately, they made a mistake, that they had to give the consultants a time when this would start and how, and he says, when we released the document, we put dates in. And he says, we should have said, the first process is gonna take 6 months. The second process, instead of May 15th to you know, December 15th, they should have not had that. He said that was a mistake we made. We should have just put in, you know, first one's 6 months, second one's, you know, X amount of time. And they're not gonna try and do the whole province all at once. In their proposal that they've got there is they would transition, so, you know, they would transition into the process. And they believe that they probably would see about 30% to 40% of the RCMP switch over to this new group. That's all they would get. And the rest, some of them would lose from age and get out of the system, and some of them would, you know, would go back to Nova Scotia, you know, or PEI, wherever they're from. So it was good. So I think if you can get a chance to go, I think Barbara's right, you know, some of those questions that Alberta municipalities have come up with, there's lots of documentation. Everybody should have got a copy of the whole document. And they talk about, but they didn't go page by page either, Sue, because he said we'd be here all day. Anyway, that was all mine. Those are the 3 that I've had so far. Like I said, I've got one on Fridays. Any questions? If not, somebody wish to move the reports? Okay, cool. Any discussion on Cole's motion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. And it is carried unanimously.
One of these days I'm gonna push a gauge just to cause some traffic.
Okay, we're moving on to administration reports, the activity management report.
You've all had a chance to read the report. You saw that everything from the last meeting was accomplished, and thanks to the great discussion we had this evening, we'll be able to take off that discussion about the industrial subdivision plan until we bring it back again. So unless there's any questions on that, my activity report, you can see where we're at. Some of these things, again, we'll be talking about during the planning to see if some of them are gonna move forward.
Yeah, like the first one, we might decide that we've had it on the list for,
Since 2016.
since 2016, to
Yeah.
drop it off, and then if it comes back to the table, throw it back on the table.
That one, it may be past its time. It's been through, you know, a couple of councils. The motion was to allow it to go ahead, but it was pending them buying equipment, those sort of things that haven't been done, so like Tom said, it might be a good one to, you know, to take off.
But anyway, any questions on any of those for Kim? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next one, which is the CA report.
The CAO report, you've all had a chance to read. It's a busy couple of weeks. Of course, quite a bit of work with the industrial subdivision. Really, honestly, getting that grant information, our reserves information, and then it seemed like the easiest part was trying to figure out the borrowing, because at least that came off straight off. We trying to anticipate what we would have in grant funding is a really tough thing right now, because their commitment at the MSI obviously has dropped 40%, those sort of things, so it's going to really play into the planning portion of what we're going to be doing. We've had met with real estate agents to sign documents for the offers to purchase. Met with Northern Company, signed off. We actually the one for Meadowlark Way is completely been completed, and that's just waiting on land titles now. So we're contacted by the homeowners association. Did hear something was going on. There was some confusion on who was developing what and where, and of course, without going into FOIP and telling them who owns what properties, we did reassure them that any development permits or anything that will require input from the condo association. So they were really good about that. More thanked for the information. We were contacted following the Ag Society meeting. We were contacted by an Ag Society member requesting some information on the inventory out there then. So I provided what we had after talking to the mayor who attended that meeting, and sure knew that that was the purpose of that was to actually get that inventory so that they could figure out what was there, what wasn't, and what the future plans of it are. So I was able to get them documents for that. Extended our janitorial services contract so that you know we tender it anytime somebody resigns, but if we're happy with their work, according to our purchasing policy, we can just, administration can just keep renewing the contract. So if there's changes in the contract, then we put it out for tender, but if it's just remains the same, we just re-sign for the new year. So again, the MSP funding that we used to pay Main Street was attached to red tape reduction. So 2 years after the fact, I'm still telling them how we reduced red tape by doing that project. So I did get all the paperwork submitted for that. We haven't heard anything back, so hopefully that will went through well, and that project will be completely finished. Got the consultants all lined up for the meeting on the 1st. Just a heads up, I call them consultants. Not all of them are consultants. They do work for you. They're not all consultants. They are auditors, those sort of things. Lens from Orsk was very quick to remind me that they're not a consultant. They actually work for us, and we pay for them. So anyway, that's if I have consultant written down, don't tell them that when they're attending. We on a very positive high note, we did a certificate for Margaret Shaw's 100th birthday coming up on the 26th. They're doing a private family thing at the lodge, but we do, anytime somebody requests it for a significant birthday, anytime after 65, we produce a certificate, and I believe the mayor also did a personalized message for that as well. So their family came and got it, they're gonna present it at her birthday party. And your Lions Club president was, I think, in the process of jumping on a plane while I was finalizing his letter and stuff, so
Yeah.
I did get all that done before he left, so. And then, yeah, that's, for my formal meetings, I attended the ambulance meeting with, the MLA. That was at the Tri-Services building, and that included myself, Doug, Nels, and one of the paramedics that's working out of the area. We met with the MLA, and, based on our previous discussion, it was more based on identifying issues for our community, making sure that our MLA knew, and then his comments back were, again, on the structure of AHS, those sort of things. They don't have control of how they do things. They have control over making laws on how they do things. So what would you change in the law to make this better? And so there was quite a bit of discussion around there, and again, got the, by the end of it, our MLA was making sure that he knew that he was going to bring this stuff forward, and was there for us to, just to make sure we keep him, if we are having meetings, keep him involved, those sort of things, and he would do what he could to try to make sure our concerns are being heard. Based on that, again, Will's still part of that committee that's working to try to advocate on behalf of that, so we're gonna try to get Will and Joseph lined up for that as well. And Doug from Protective Services is more than willing to come and do a presentation to council on where we're at so far. And some of his, because he has a couple of private meetings with some HS is actually starting to answer the phone to him, so that's a lot more promising. But so, and of course, we don't always like what he has to say, but they're talking to him. So once we get a little bit further along, I'll make sure that he can do a presentation to you to see where we're at. And then met with a residential developer about the development proposal. Most of you are fairly aware of what's going to come and the basis of it, but he's also going to attend as from the consultant side, just so that he knows your faces, those sort of things, but isn't going to go into the development a whole bunch. He's going to save that for another presentation to council once we have everything in place that we can look at moving it forward. And we're just honestly still kicking around ideas with that, and also conversations. Of course, you're probably all aware from the emails that are coming out. We also had a conversation about affordable housing, and there's going to be some federal funding being allocated for that, and that might be something that you might be interested in moving forward with as well. So it's a very productive meeting. They always start, the meetings with that developer start out as 10-minute meetings to just discuss one point, and 2 hours later, he's still banging papers down in front of me and full of ideas, so they're really good. So, and that's my report.
Any questions, concerns for Kim? Hearing none, somebody wish to file with Judy? Administration reports. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. And it is carried unanimously.
Call
Okay.
Will in his meeting and see if he wants
Yeah.
to make a motion. Or in his exam.
Adjournment. Well, Lana moves.
He was very fast, too.
It's like my first time in 2 sessions of council.
Okay, so Lana moves that we adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question.
I just signed out.
Richard's in favor, I would guess.
Okay, it's carried
Just in case you ever
unanimously.
figured it
Officially closed.
So I'm going
Okay,
to
so
just
12:30.
end the meeting, and if I can keep everybody